Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 24 of the Live Your Jam podcast. So something's happening right now, and I think many of us have either felt it or noticed it too. More and more people are turning towards mediumship, towards the unseen, toward the question of what happens when we die and whether the people we've lost are truly gone. Here's what I believe. I believe that mediumship isn't just about talking to the dead. I think it's actually a tool to change the world, or at the very least, to shift our collective paradigm about what life actually is. And the science is starting to catch up. At the University of Virginia School of Medicine, I've talked about this before on the podcast, there's a research division called the Division of Perceptual Studies. This is just one university, one learning institution that has studied the unseen. But at UVA, they've been studying consciousness, near-death experiences, past life memories, and the possibility that the mind survives physical death since 1967. I mean, that's almost 60 years. So the data is in, and they are credentialed researchers inside a major medical school, and all that stuff our left brain and ego loves. So they're taking these questions seriously, and that matters. Because when people start to see the synchronicities, the miracles, the moments that simply can't be explained away, when they receive real, verifiable evidence that there's something beyond this physical life, something shifts. They stop seeing themselves as just a person moving through a random existence and start understanding that they're a soul on a journey. That doesn't give you chills. It gives me chills. So that we have come here with intention, with purpose, and that the soul itself is the key to unlocking the fullest, most authentic expression of who we are. We're also living in a cultural moment where these conversations are going mainstream in a big way. Podcasts, books, and documentaries exploring consciousness and what lies beyond are drawing and finding massive audiences. People are hungry for this. And I think that hunger is telling us something important, which is exactly why my guest today stopped me in my tracks. I first heard Linda Rauch speaking on the Shift Network, and I'll tell you what caught me. It wasn't just her mediumship, 40 years of tarot, or the fact that she's an initiated Wiccan priestess. All of that is fascinating. Her story is fascinating. We're going to talk about that today. But what stopped me was something she said about how even when you begin to understand that you are a soul in human form, even when you truly get that, it just doesn't take away the messy bits of life. And I thought, this woman is spot on, because so often in the spiritual world, we make it sound like awareness solves everything, and it doesn't. The mess is still there, and we just get better tools for navigating it. So I knew I had to meet her. So I booked a session with Linda, and she was so real. It was part mentor, part like seeing my soul, part grounded, compelling. On that morning, it was just what I needed. And I'm so grateful. And so that session also led me to her book, The Psychic's Way, which is the #1 Amazon bestseller, which we're going to talk about today. Linda's story is fascinating. So Linda has been seeing and sensing spirit since childhood. And she, as I mentioned, is a medium, Wiccan priestess initiated, ordained spiritualist minister, a healer, a homeopath, a counselor who spent years at San Francisco General Hospital with people facing terminal illness, and is a very genuine guide. So I'm so excited to bring this conversation to you and Linda to the podcast. Linda, welcome so much to Live Your Jam.
Thank you. That's made me emotional, that introduction. It's like, oh, you're talking about me?
Wonderful.
Oh, it's so lovely. Thank you so much. That really is lovely. And I think you've covered everything, which is great. And your discussion about mediumship is just, it's so right for now. It's so true. It is potentially not an answer, but one of the things we can use as the human family to help us move forward if we are going to move forward.
Yeah, beautiful. True. So I'm so excited to learn more, have our listeners learn more about you. So I'm going to dig right into like your origins and path. So Linda, you've been sensing and seeing spirit since childhood. So what was that like actually growing up? And did you feel different, isolated, or all of the above? Just help us understand what it was like for you.
So picture a small bedroom in cold, damp 1960s England, where You very rarely can get completely warm. You can very rarely go out on a winter's day without being wrapped up thoroughly, without feeling damp at the end of the day. You can never really feel dry. And I was in a family with 4 children, my grandmother, who was living with us with PTSD, and 2 young parents. My parents were young and they had 4 children very quickly. And so I was kind of observing the world anyway from that place, because there was a lot of trauma in my community around me. So it was always this kind of sense of, well, I better check this world out first before I move forward. And then at night, when I would lie there awake at night by myself, I would see things. I would see, they were like fast moving curtains of energy. That's how it seemed. And they would just kind of go past. And I would sense them coming close sometimes without being able to see them. And I thought they came from the wallpaper. In fact, I remembered this very recently. It was interesting. I was doing a meditation and I can't remember the details of it, but it was something about reclaiming your past. And I had a vision of the actual wallpaper and it came back to me. They were little shepherds and shepherdesses as kind of young people with their staffs and very pretty kind of cottagey England scene. And I thought these beings or people were coming through the wallpaper, through, that they were those people coming to see me. I must have been at least 4 because my sister was born. So I'd say, 4, 5, something like that, maybe younger, but it was scary. It was terrifying. And I would call my parents. My parents were exhausted. So most of the time they'd just, be fast asleep. And my grandmother, who was always awake at night, would come and calm me down. And sometimes that wasn't enough. And I would insist that my dad would wake up and I'd go and knock on their door and say, you've got to search the house. There's people in the house. And he'd search the house just to make me happy. And there wouldn't be people there. So it was hard. It was very, very hard. I had no reference point. Not until I was 18, 19 did I have anybody to talk about any of this with.
I can imagine that would be difficult to understand, and also to not to be validated as a young child would be difficult as well. So, what point did you stop questioning it, Linda, and start kind of leaning into it more?
Yeah, I always question. I never stop questioning. I'm aware that we're only seeing such a tiny fragment of the universe. And so my experience is going to be a tiny fragment of that. And so I can make a lot of assumptions, but there's always a part of me that looks at my experiences, however miraculous they are, however validated they are, and ask the questions of what is this all about. But in terms of the spirit work, as a teenager, I had precognition. So I used to dream that airplane accidents were going to happen, and they happened. My grandmother was going to die and she died the next day, and things like that. That was even more scary. So the beings, a spirit, whoever they were, they went into the background. I stopped seeing those quite young, but the precognition kicked off big time. And that was really, really difficult. And it wasn't until I was 18 or 19 that I met somebody who was a healer and had a background in this kind of work. And I talked to her, and she gave me a guardian angel prayer, which helped me ground myself at night. And whenever I was frightened, I would kind of bring that about. So I think in terms of feeling safe with the presence of spirit, it's an ongoing process. It really is an ongoing process, to be honest about it.
Yeah.
There are very few mediums that see spirit objectively, that actually see someone like I did as a child. And I know I have that ability to open that back up again. And it has happened to me on odd occasions, but I don't like that. I don't want to see spirit in front of me as an objective force of energy. I want them in my head. So while I've leaned into the communication, which probably about 20 years ago was when I really went into it, because I'd done everything else, not everything, but astrology and Reiki and tarot and iridology, homeopathy, energy medicines and divination, you name it. I've done so many things. And a friend of mine said to me, the only thing you really haven't gone back into is the mediumship. And so I did. And I had a wonderful teacher called Henry Cummings, who I went to one of his one-day workshops at the College of Psychic Studies. And he was asking, why are you frightened, to the whole class? What do you think has stopped you from connecting with spirit up till now? Because you can all do it. We can all do it. And I said to him, I don't want to experience The Omen. I saw that movie. I don't want to experience that. And he said, there are scarier people in your own family than you will ever meet on the other side of life. And I've never met your family. And for some reason, that just cleared it for me. And that was like, wow, okay, in that case, boom. And then literally we did a meditation. The next exercise, I was seeing spirit again, seeing inside my head, not outside of my head. So I'm reaching a point, actually, it's interesting you asked me that question. I'm reaching a point where I am more open to the idea of seeing more what we call phenomena. So the objective experience of spirit, things happening in front of us. If something got up and moved now across the table, I would be open to that. So I think I'm reaching that point. It's taken a long time. And I think it's very much connected to our fear of death itself. And I am more comfortable with the idea of death. And I've worked with death and dying people, in the San Francisco General. They, for 6 years, they were all dying. All my clients were dying. So I've done a lot of work with people with death and dying. I've seen a lot of death. But something, as you get older, I guess, I realize it's going to happen. I might have 20 years if I'm really lucky. I might have 30, but it's going to happen. And therefore, it's just part of life. And that has maybe made me more open.
It brings up more questions for me, which I have one that I want to ask. But I think that the honesty in which, there's an openness that we have to these kind of gifts and phenomenon and things. And what you just shared was you've had a journey of it. And, that you had the premonitions. I also, in your book, you talk about the crop circles and being able to experience the energy there. And then how it was stages of this. And also your own limitation of fear kind of blocked some things as well, and how you're kind of resolving that. So no, I appreciated it. I do wonder, you've gone into all these modalities and studies around energy and various, metaphysics. Was that part of the curiosity of trying to understand what was going on for you? Or did you just inherently feel drawn to tarot, these, divination tools, all these different things? Or was it a little bit of both? I mean, if you could just, what led you to kind of study those things?
So I haven't thought about it before, so give me a minute to think about it. I think it's part, or first thing that came to my mind is, just now, is the image of my astrological chart. And I have a lot of planets in the ninth house, which is study and travel. And so I obviously have a natural predisposition. I was also taught by my father to constantly question and to constantly learn. And he was fascinated in all things. And so it was part of my background. And also I wanted to understand not only what I was experiencing in terms of metaphysical side of things, the unseen world, but my own psychology as well, because I spent a period of time as a counselor. So I can't help it. I'm constantly questioning, and I'm constantly searching, and I'm constantly exploring. Having said that, there was a period of time in around 2012 when I had what's called an embodied awakening. And that gives you the possibility or the experience of feeling the world really at its true nature, the oneness of the world. And then the searching drops. So suddenly it wasn't necessary to search as much anymore, because I had a settling, a grounding within my body, a felt sense of, okay, this is it. This is all I need to know, is that there is this pudding of porridge that we all exist within, that we're all connected to. And that's all you need to know. Just experience it. And, that's all you need to know. But that awareness comes and goes. When after that experience, it was very, very powerful for a number of months. Then you integrate it slowly into your life and go back to your little squabbles with your husband and all those kind of things. So the searching has diminished, not completely. I'm always thirsty for exploring new aspects of beauty, whether it's a wisdom tradition or music or whatever. They're just human expressions, and the way human formats their experiences and structures their experiences, all of that just fascinates me.
And we're going to talk more about your book and how you use the archetypes of tarot to kind of frame it. And there's stories just replete in the tarot, particularly in the major arcana. But we'll get that into a little bit. But one thing I am curious about, you became an initiated Wiccan priestess. What drew you to that path specifically, and what does that lineage mean to you today?
The way that it happened was very unusual and random. I got a job with a family in San Francisco when I first arrived there, and I picked up a book one day that the little 8-month-old baby was asleep, and it was The Fifth Sacred Thing by Starhawk, and I started reading it, and it was just this like, wow, this is incredible. This feels familiar. This is like, wow, this all makes sense to me. And it wasn't about witchcraft, but it was obviously written by a witch. So I asked if I could borrow the book, and the woman said, I'm so pleased you've asked me because I'm a witch and you're looking after my baby, and I didn't know how you'd feel about that because, not everybody's okay with that. We became friends, and she invited me into the community, and I started attending rituals. And she suggested at the beginning that I read The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. And I remember sitting in a typical San Francisco house, wooden beams on the walls that, surrounded by this kind of crackling sense of wood and wood floor. And I was on a rocking chair, which was one of the only pieces of furniture in this rented room in this very old house. And I was kind of rocking away, reading this book, and I was sort of half dozing. And all of a sudden I went into a spontaneous vision of myself as a witch. And I was reading the first chapter, and I saw a member of my family who was kind of handing me in and saying, she's the witch. And I saw it all in absolute such vivid detail. And then I kind of came to, it's like, oh, it just happened. And I went back to this woman who I was working for, and I told her, and she said, oh yeah, people have talked about that when you start reading that book, you come back to your life. And yeah. And Starhawk started reclaiming, and that was the whole point of that word, using that word reclaiming. You reclaim your old lives. So I'm pretty sure, and I've had many other past life experiences, either related to that life or other lives as a witch, I'm not sure, but several experiences specifically around Wales. So I know I've been a witch in a previous life. So the particular lineage, the reclaiming lineage, I'm not attached to that because I don't like the idea of being attached to any kind of tradition. It's not necessary. It might give you brownie points in the human realm, but it doesn't actually mean anything other than the fact that some amazing people before you have done things in a really incredible way. So I have a lot of respect to Victor and Cora Anderson, through which the tradition came through. I have enormous respect for Starhawk and from her couple sisters that initiated me, but now I'm not part of that community. I'm enormously grateful. I'm still friends with that first woman and other people that I met. But I feel like anyone can be a witch. They don't need a lineage. They don't need to be initiated through any kind of tradition. They just need to practice and improve themselves and heal themselves in the world. And that's it.
Very interesting. It's funny how things find us in life when they're supposed to. And also too, that soul resonance of you when you picked up the book and you're like, why does this sound completely spot on for me? Right. And I call that soul resonance, where it's just inexplicable, but it lights us up and then it takes us down a new path. So thank you for that. So let's talk about mediumship. There's lots of mediums out there, and there's different ways that mediums provide evidence. There's different programs that certify. So there's a lot out there. I just want to caveat it with saying with people, like, do your homework on mediums. But I want to walk us through what is actually happening in a mediumship reading, and what are you experiencing on your end?
I completely agree with you. If you're going to train with mediums, look for the person that feels right to you. Follow your heart, because it's a heart-based practice, and you have to be able to be comfortable and feel safe wherever you're going to be training. So it's very important. And that they have experience. The more experience they have, the more they'll bring to mediumship. So when I work with somebody, I open up, I just inform spirit that I'm going to be working now just by sitting down and having the intention in my mind that this is what I'm about to do. And I will invite in the family, spirit family of whoever's sitting in front of me. In fact, sometimes I don't necessarily invite them. I sit down, I'm ready, I open, and they're there. Often they're ready. I listen with two ears. You know, one ear is listening to the person I'm working with, and the other is listening to spirit. So I hear things, I hear words, I hear sounds, and I see images. And images just pass through my mind very quickly, like a movie. And I pick snippets because you can't grab it all because it usually goes so fast. And I'll relay that to the other person. And when I'm really strongly connected to spirit, and when there's a meaningful point which they want me to give to the person, and I do, as I speak it, my body responds. So I will get goosebumps. Spirit shower. One of our students used the term spirit shower this week, which is beautiful. So yeah, a spirit shower. I get this feeling of all down my body of right, thank you. It really feels like spirit saying thank you. You got it right. Yes, that's what I want you to say. And that's it. I just listen, both ears, and I open up to the idea that this person is here for healing. And I do my best to make that possible.
You talked about being in San Francisco in general and working with with people who are dying there. And, you know, I had this on, my mother passed and she was 97 in April. And I was with her when she passed. It was lovely. But she was seeing departed family members. My father, she had lost 2 sons, and her mother, she saw her mother, a caregiver came in and said, "Mom, do you know who this is?" And she looked off and she said, "Mom." So she was, in my view, her greeting party was there. You know, there are spirits that are coming to usher us over to the other side, because it is, again, a huge transition. So imagining in San Francisco General and your work, you saw a number of welcoming committees. Can you share about how any of your gifts came through when you were working with people in hospice?
Well, at the time, it wasn't hospice. I was working in a clinic.
Okay.
I saw some of them in hospital, but not all of them. In terms of welcoming parties, I'm not sure at what point it became obvious because so many people talked about it. I used to have support groups for the bereaved. And so many people would talk about the person who had died, had waited for someone in particular to come, or they'd seen different people. So I'd had that knowledge over and over and over. I could sense when someone was getting close to death that there was a different energy about them. And I used to feel that. But at the time, I wasn't doing mediumship because that was a decade or so before. And in a way, lucky I wasn't, because it would have been a very, very difficult job if I had been. But it has informed me in other ways because I saw so many phenomena, so many things happening with the clients because they were so close to death, and also because there was so much upheaval in their lives. There was no anchor. Very few of them had long-term relationships. Very few of them had a regular home. Very few of them had family anymore. They'd kind of upset their families. So they were just living rough. And sometimes they'd live somewhere for a while and they get thrown out. So there was chaos in their lives. And when people are in chaos, they're more open to phenomena. So one of the strange things was I noticed that I was being told on regular occasions by totally different people who didn't know each other that they'd had alien abductions or they'd had alien experiences, to the extent that I set up a support group for people who said they'd had alien experiences. And at the time, I didn't know much about it. Now I know an awful lot more. But it makes sense now looking back at it. There's this chaos of life and the phenomena that would happen.
I have read stories of people who are in turmoil and chaos in their life and have kind of alternative experiences like you're talking about. And for like the human mind, it doesn't kind of add up, you know, and we can easily go what we do to the people who are dying, which is like they're hallucinating. Like we put some framework on it that works for us, and that's okay. But I have heard a number of stories, and I just wonder if there's a way when there's so much chaos in your life, you're not even really in your ego and thinking mind anyway, you know, that it's a different kind of way of experiencing consciousness. I mean, which sounds, I don't fully understand, but do you have any thoughts on that, kind of why that's happening for people?
When we're constrained to our stories, there isn't room for what's actually happening. And once that's released, it's like, taking massive amount of hallucinogens. You see the world, you see the unseen world, you see the different beings, you see the energy that goes between things. And that is all constrained the more we have tightened rules and regulations around who we are. So when you're doing drugs and having chaos in your life, you're much more vulnerable to that. Now, the thing is, because they're going through life, the addicts that I worked with, they were so busy. So they were very, very distracted. So a lot of it they didn't notice. And near-death experiences were common because the best high was the one before you die, is what they used to tell me. And so they would fight for that edge. And then, each time it's like go a little bit further, and sometimes it was too late, but they all knew how to pull each other back from death. So it was common for them, but chaos was common. So to see a bit of the unseen world was no big deal. But I had one experience. I'm not sure if you remember this from the book about Raven, when I visited Raven at the end of his life. So
tell this story.
After my initiation, I was extremely open, and I was living in that kind of chaos world. It's like nothing made sense to me because I'd had this entire year process of breaking down the ego. And unfortunately, just before I had my initiation, my sister got very ill and I had to go back to England very quickly, and she nearly died. And we did a color descent. So I was in the color purple, which when you wear that color, then it affects the chakra. And that meant that my upper chakras and my crown chakra and all my upper chakras were kind of wide open. Oh. And so I was feeling and sensing everything. Anyway, so I had the initiation and my crown chakra blew open completely. I could not ground. And I kept getting these messages from someone that I vaguely heard of in the community many years before, called Raven, saying, "You've got to come and see me and bring me 3 pomegranates." And it wouldn't go away. And I thought, if I don't do this, it's never going to go away. So I asked a friend who was a social worker, who worked with me in the hospital. She worked actually in the hotels. And so she said, "Yeah, I'll take you." And so she took me to one of these awful, awful hotels, which was just, the pits of the earth. You cannot imagine how bad they are. And I arrived at this door, which was his. I knocked on the door, and my Wiccan initiation name, my priestess name, is Wolfbane. And he opened the door, which was open because no point in anyone locking their doors because people break in. He opened it and he said, "Welcome, Wolfbane. I've been expecting you." That was so strange. But at that point in my life, nothing was strange. He was expecting something. I gave him the pomegranates. He said, "Thank you." And then I saw marked on the wall, there were these marking system, where you do 4 dashes and a line across. And there were hundreds and hundreds of them. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Those are the people I've midwifed into death," because we were right in the middle of the AIDS crisis. I said, "Wow, okay, thank you very much, goodbye." And, that was it. He wasn't interested in chatting to me. So I left and I told my initiators and said, "Look, this is what this guy's been doing." And he was a renegade. He'd been thrown out of the community for stealing or something. And they after that, they brought him back into the community and they nursed him to death because he was dying of AIDS. So that kind of world was not uncommon in my experiences.
I think you nailed it with it's the ego death. I mean, there's different kinds of ego deaths, right?
Yeah.
And there's the ones that the monk can sit at the highest top of the mountain and try to get there. And then there's this other kind when, ironically, chaos can detach you from, all the identity. I mean, if the ego, there's not a lot of egos that want that identity, right? So they have to let go of it, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, and again, as we all say, like, what if, what if this is true? What if it isn't? But the story of Raven is fascinating. You also studied homeopathy, and do you use that today? And did you use it back then? And what influence does that have in your life today?
I started training because my closest friend, who was another social that worked with me at the hospital, who I always took her advice, and she said to me, "You've got an 8-month-old baby. You've got to get another profession. You're not going to go back into substance abuse counselling. Do homeopathy. I'm training. It's amazing." So I did. I listened to her, and it was incredible. I did that for a number of years and saw a lot of healing through homeopathy. It was phenomenal. And it is incredible energy medicine. It's just a profound way of using the body's intents to heal itself. So I am not seeing patients very often. I do still see some of my old patients I saw for many years. Very rarely do I take on a new client because I'm doing this work most of the time now. But because it is so profound and I still love it so much, I keep it in my life. I'm going to a pharmaceutical company have asked me to come in and give a talk on homeopathy, which I'm doing on Monday, which is unheard of because we're, completely different. So I'm looking forward to that because, it's a bit of validation. Homeopathy has had a very, very hard time because you can't prove it, really. You can show that practically it helps. Even that has been questioned, but I've seen literal miracles with homeopathy. My way of doing it was I called my website spiritual homeopathy because I always integrated the psychic part of it. When you're taking a case, you have to really use your psychic abilities, which I always used as well and count as well. So, I developed that a little bit more into medical intuition and using it throughout a case. It's very much still in my life. I made remedies out of things like circles over the years and had loads of amazing fun with it, and still have a bunch of books. All these books on the bottom shelf, pretty much they're all homeopathy. So it's still a very big part of my life, and it is a profound and esoteric medicine that, as long as it doesn't disappear completely, at some point it will come back hard and fast as one of the most important medicines that we have. In some countries, like in India, it was like a form of medicine. I think that's probably changed now because of the way things have, you can't monetize it. You can only, I make the remedies myself. It's only the homeopaths that make money. So it doesn't capitalist world. Really.
It's nice when we see these ancient traditions kind of coming back and are wanting to understand them. So I wanted to touch on that because you are drawing from a bunch of different modalities, and I want people to know that there's room for everything, in term, and also too, like if you're following your soul, this is where it takes us, right? It takes us on these journeys, and then some things weave together and some things don't. And, I had a friend say to me once, like, I try things and then I don't stick with them. I'm like, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
That's just that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Going to where your interests lie, exploring them, and then going to the next thing. That's not quitting. It'll all make sense. And these are all expressions of you. So do it, so I like your story for that reason as well. I do want to tap into a little bit more on the mediumship in terms of, like, what advice would you give someone who's grieving and hoping to connect with somebody who's passed? I mean, I've been on many like mediumship kind of educational pieces, and the majority of the audience is really hoping to connect to somebody on the other side. Like they want to learn about it, but I can feel they're grieving, and I'm always there for a little bit more of the learning piece, which is fine. But people are grieving, and what advice would you give them when somebody's passed? Like, what do you say to them, and how should they prepare, and what should they expect?
Wow, there's about a million answers to. The first thing that came to mind was that there was a guy that was talking about doing a practice of letting go, and that he's had a near-death experience that blew his mind, changed everything. And he's doing 3 Sundays or something like that, where he's getting together with people to just let go. And he talked about that process of letting go and how incredibly painful it is to let go of everything you don't need. And that's what he did after his near-death experience. He felt felt so blown away by being open up to life that he was so grateful for just breathing, kind of thing, that he didn't need all the stuff that he's. And so I think it's the letting go process that is so difficult. And it's part of the progression of the development of your own soul in the human form that it is, to get to a place where you're comfortable letting go even of loved ones. And a lot of the reason why people can't let go is because they don't have the confidence that they're going to have the answers themselves. There is the very real loss of the physical body going somewhere with someone and that kind of thing. And there's nothing that's going to replace that. That,
Mm-hmm.
you're always going to feel that. But the part that can be helped is letting people know that if they just find out more about themselves, and if they just look into where they need to grow, where they need to nourish, where to focus and heal their own shadow, I think the grieving process gets much easier. And most people don't do
Yeah.
that. They stick in their grief because it's easier than actually growing.
Agreed. And I think so for somebody who's the messages that come through can be helpful. And
Yes.
that's usually what I've found is like the messages, because the person on the other side can see the stuckness of the other person. And it's true, the physical, like the day in, day out with that person, we do miss that. And that is difficult. But I think there's so much to be gained in the relationship and of ourselves when somebody does pass, So what I'm hearing you saying is be open to so much more. The soul, in my opinion, it wants to continually learn and grow. That's why it's here.
Mm.
And it's I don't think there's really a barometer I think we're the barometer on how far that can go, because the soul's like, I'll just keep going. So unfortunately, all of these experiences are here for our benefit, as difficult as they are. So when someone passes, I see the same opportunity to shift perspective, to also feel the true grief of and sadness and loss of what it can feel. That's part of it as well. We're not supposed to stay stuck there, though. We're supposed to transmute that. So thank you for such a beautiful answer. So I want to talk about a mediumship's like highest purpose, and not just for the individual, but for humanity. Like, what is your philosophy, and what is it? What is the mediumship is, in general, what is its highest purpose, and what does it serve?
So at the moment, I think it changes. At the moment, if I was to wave a magic wand and make everybody have mediumistic abilities, being able to talk to their loved ones on the other side of life, the most important thing is accountability. Because what's happening is too many people are harming themselves, harming their families, harming the world in all sorts of different ways, and there's no accountability. Governments, states are no longer respected or listened to. Religions are rarely listened to. There's no systems in place that make humans feel safe. And so they just do whatever they like, and without consequences a lot of the time. The consequences are changing. They can't rely on the law. And so there's no accountability at all. The most important accountability is to your parents as a child, as you're most likely to listen to your parents initially as a child. And I think when we get older and our loved ones are on the other side of life, we revert back to that childhood openness, because we know that they're not coming in with their agenda, their human agendas. They're coming in through love.
Yeah.
And so we listen. So if the father came in and said, no, stop doing that. Stop having the air conditioning on the whole time. Think about the environment, or you're being really horrible to your husband. Think about what that is, or whatever. I mean, it's rarely that spirit comes through in that kind of judgmental, practical terms.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That it would probably be more framed into go out into nature more, start connecting with nature, start understanding, how technology affects nature, or whatever. They would guide us in that way. And if we thought that there was someone watching us that we really cared about, we would be more careful. I think we really would, especially with some of the really hard stuff that's happening on the earth right now. I think people would really think twice.
Yeah.
So that to me is an unusual answer about mediumship. Obviously, for healing purposes, because people have such wounds and we need those wounds. But at the moment, we have a bigger problem, which is extremist views in every respect, not just religious, but politics, that are getting out of control. And we have a real danger on the planet right now with the climate, etc. So we need to heal, but that takes some time. I think there needs to be accountability.
Do you see that coming through in some of the sessions you're holding? Spirit sort of saying to people, mean, spirit, people usually come through with a constructive message, to your point, but have you seen that come up in terms of, I mean, because a lot of the messages are instructive, right? It's to go more towards
Yes.
love and light, and they're trying to help guide people. Number one, to let go of their grief, that they're okay. And then the other one is to, like, do you see that coming up, some of the accountability messaging from spirit?
Unfortunately, some awful politician is unlikely to come to me.
I get your point.
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be something that happens to the people that aren't helping themselves already. And most people that come to me are already working on themselves. So the kind of messages I tend to get are just, it's just things like, with homeopathic remedies show the body what the body can't see. And the body's then able to heal itself. And it's the same with mediumship. And same with counseling. So spirit is offering mirror. Spirit will come in and give exactly the right message that person hasn't seen themselves.
Yeah.
So it's more likely to be self-development and healing.
Yeah. Great answer. Makes sense. You talked about tarot. That's a good transition. Congratulations. Your book, The Psychic's Way, is a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And, the book is structured, as I mentioned in the beginning, around the 22 major arcana in tarot. And that's literally the hero's journey. And that is the human journey, where we step out into the world and we go on this big adventure. And in the end, we come back and share our lessons with our community. And they're great archetypes in tarot, and are universal images, something we can all relate to, and also has soul resonance. So you map your journey in your life to each one of the 22. And I think that's powerful, because I love archetypes, because they're essentially stories, aren't they? And, so the Fool, the Tower, the High Priestess, so how did that come to you, like, to tell your story through the tarot, the major arcana?
I can't remember exactly when or how, but I've been doing tarot over 40 years. I've done all sorts of training in tarot, and I'm aware that it is the soul's journey, the major arcana. And so when I was structuring the book, and I was structuring it in terms of what lessons I'd learnt along the way, it just made sense to relate it to the major arcana. So that's what I did. When I wrote the book, it was so interesting, because if you do go back on your life, you start to see that those random things that you did, actually pretty much all of them had a purpose that is either comes up later or was relevant at that time. So the journey, we repeat the cycle of the major arcana. We learn it at different levels. So as a baby, you learn the Fool at one level, and then as a teenager, etc., etc. But I just wanted people to fall in love with tarot as much as I do, and understand how incredibly profound it is. It as a divination tool. We don't know the actual history, but it's very much connected to the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, which is, again, a system of understanding the soul's development. It makes so much sense in so many ways, how those different lessons come to us in different ways at different times. And in terms of learning, again, I'm currently learning a new system of tarot, which is completely different from what I've done for many years, which is great. So I'm working with that at the moment. So it doesn't stop. This love of tarot doesn't stop. And the archetypes are really helpful to kind of, hang your life on and have a look at where they show up and how. So it just made sense.
Yeah, wonderful. I love the tarot as well. Was there anything in the book that you're nervous to share? Personally, for me, somebody's like, your throat chakra is blocked. I'm like, yeah, it is a little. I don't like to tell my personal stories all that much, so I'm still kind of working through all of that. But how was it for you?
Well, it's, to be honest, it's not all in there.
Yeah.
The X-rated stuff is not in there. Some of the relationship stuff, because I had to think about how people were going to feel about it if they read about themselves, members of my family, relationships, etc. So I had to be very respectful and careful about that. The thing I'm most scared about still, and was, when I was writing it, I wasn't, because I wasn't thinking of it going out to a bigger audience, was the Jewish part of it. And that's because there is so much anti-Semitism now.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to define who I am. I'm extremely proud of being Jewish and having that blood, that heritage, that ancestry, that incredible, rich history and philosophy. So, I'm very proud of all of that, and the fact that a tiny little tribe, such a small percentage of the world, has still survived after genocide after genocide in pretty much every generation. But I was very nervous about that, and still am. I still am nervous about if that's going to become a weapon at some point that's going to come back in my face. So that really was the thing that I was most scared of. But it's who I am, so it was very hard not to have that as part of as the book, because that's who I am. So
yeah. And that's in the very beginning of the book. The Fool, like, you pay homage to your grandparents who immigrated over to England, and also to that was the trauma that you're referring to about that your grandmother suffered, not only the journey, but the persecution they were escaping, and also to what the feeling and constriction in that time and the fear, and how it's very compelling, and it's a beautiful part. And it kind of explains exactly what you were talking about in the beginning, being that little girl, and that, England is damp and cold, and a bit of the heating systems were not so great back then. And so in that environment too, of being constricted, right? And around, and your grandmother was a great help to you, at night and things like that. But you grew up in that environment, and that's an energy that children come into. And so I can understand how that would be lingering a bit and a concern. So I encourage everybody. Linda told the story about the raven, and we've kind of outlined, but it's really her life story told through not the X-rated parts, as we just learned, through the major arcana. So it's a wonderful reflection on tarot and the archetypes, and how Linda kind of relates it to her life. So I encourage everybody to check that book out. So kind of winding up here, there is a lot of noise out there. And, so how does somebody know if they're sitting with a genuine medium? Because I want to just ground this, because, throughout the ages, mediums have done good work and then taken advantage of people, and so because people are at their most vulnerable if they're coming to see you, to listen, get hopefully a loved one from the other side comes through. So how does someone know when they're sitting with a genuine medium versus someone who isn't? You said for people to trust their heart. I get that, but they're at a little, hearts can be tough when they're grieving, right? Because how does our wanting, right? Our wanting and our fear can kind of override that. So what are some good kind of advice, tips you have for people to find a good medium?
That's a hard one, because this good medium are heart-based and they mean well. And even with the best training and even with decades of experience, people still, mediums can still make mistakes. I think it's the same way I used to say with when people chose counselors. It's like, if you can spend 15 minutes with them, obviously it's difficult when you are booking in, but check them out. Often mediums have little videos on their websites and stuff, and just watch out for projections, watch out for, use your intuition to feel like, are they really connected, or are they in the ego trying to get it right?
Yeah.
Are they genuine people? We're always looking for authenticity. If you have an authentic, and look, I'm not 100% authentic all the time. I don't, there's not many people who are. I try to be, and it's my highest value. But some people, they're just into having impression, making money, or they just want to have the power, the control. And if anyone sits there and tells you that spirit's telling you off or telling you to do something that isn't comfortable for you, you're with the wrong person, because spirit comes through with unconditional love. So if you don't feel that unconditional love when you're sitting with a medium, and that's not what is highermost and completely filling the room, you're not with a good medium. Go with referral. If someone says they've had a great reading, and unfortunately people base it on, did they get enough names? Did they get names? Did they get dates? Did they tell you which sickness you've had, or whatever it is? They base what they think good mediums are simply on the evidence. And that's not what a good medium is. Evidence is important only to anchor the message, only for you to say, okay, I trust the medium now. They're getting evidence. They must know something. The most important bit is the message, is what comes through, is the healing that takes place when you have a reunion with your loved one. That's what's important. The evidence isn't important. So you're not looking for somebody who gives good evidence. You're looking for somebody who has seen a friend of yours, and your friend is in a different state when they come out of the medium reading than they were before they're healed. They've received healing.
Yeah, my experience in studying and looking at all of this, the evidence is used up front to validate the spirit that's
Yeah.
coming through. And then after that, it's about the message. So a lot of mediums don't get names. I think if a medium is asking you a lot of questions in the beginning and trying to get information for you, that's the wrong direction to go. So I think
Yeah.
in the beginning, you should be sitting quiet and the person should be trying to validate. And they will get some things wrong, but you have to wait for the message and kind of be patient a little bit. So yeah, it's a tough one. There are places out there that the Forever Family Foundation, Woodbridge. I mean, there's also, there's lots of different ways now for people who do your research, I would say. So, and also like, be curious. I think you really have to have an open mindset, be curious. And the message is really the most healing salve. So if you get something from that, that's good.
Yeah.
So final question here, Linda, after all of this lifetime of work, the book, the decades of service, what does living your jam, which in my case is attuning to your soul and leading a soul-led life, and then our life will follow from that. What does that look like for you?
Wow. I probably should have guessed that you might ask that question given the name of your podcast. If I had guessed, I'd have given it more thought, because actually I haven't got a clue. Oh, a nice afternoon tea is lovely. I'm going to a Crop Circle conference this weekend. For me, when I'm happiest is when I'm fired up about something that I've learned or that I'm experiencing. I absolutely love working with my students. I have hundreds of students now who come and see me at an advanced level that I get to know on Zoom. And when I get to have one-to-ones with people, especially when I'm doing spiritual assessments, when I really go deep with people, that is really lovely for me, because I know that's where I'm most helping people. My 3 cats, heaven to me is snuggling with my cats and just trying to be in an embodied, grounded human that is responsible and accountable and available, and just doing the best I can for the world that we live in now, and for myself, and my family, just to kind of be me, really. So
I actually think that's the expression of it, is to follow the things that light us up. And from there, we are of service to others. And Linda has some master classes going on. I'm going to put some information on the website around that. I'll have a link where you can find her book and where you can find her. She's doing a lot of really interesting work. Some of the master classes on mediumship, her spiritual assessment is the session that I had with her, which was, clearly you're in your jam there, because I had a wonderful experience with you. So I thank you so much for being on here and sharing your perspective and stories. So I appreciate all of it. So we're going to sign off now, everybody, from Ellen and Linda. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Live Your Jam podcast. If today's episode sparked insight or inspiration, follow that thread. That's your inner wisdom speaking. Share this episode with a friend who'd vibe with it. And if you're moved to, leave a review so others can find their way here too. Remember, the dreams that stir within you aren't frivolous. They're instructions from your soul. You can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or watch the video version on YouTube to see me and my amazing guests in action. Until next time, keep listening in and keep living your jam.